This is part 10, the Magi versus the Sorcerer. If you enjoy this video series or any of the videos I've been doing, please like and subscribe. Also, it's great to hear your comments or your suggestions or your questions in the comments, so please feel free to participate. I would also like to mention, I want to apologize in advance because I know that I'll do maybe an hour-long video in one of these sections here in this series, and then I'll just abruptly chop it in half. So I just want to warn you ahead of time if the video seems to abruptly stop. It's just because my amazing editing skills that I'm using. I just chop it right there in half, and then you'll see part 2 the next week. Of course, if you look at the video description, it will tell you if it's part 1 of 2, so you'll know ahead of time if one of the videos is going to be abruptly chopped. So now let's get into part 10. This is quite an interesting section here. We're going to look at the kind of the tension or the forces, the struggle between good and evil in a way, right? And it's going to involve an interesting dynamic. And this is a very well-known occult, ancient esoteric understanding of the nature, the very nature of good and evil, or the sorcerer and the Magi in this case. So the battle between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, okay, this is a great example. This battle between these two here represents the two opposing worldviews of the Magi and the Sorcerer. Now, when I say worldviews, we could just as easily interchange the term worldview. We could interchange that with good and evil, night and day, right? Life and death. There's so many different ways we can interchange this. So what I'm trying to convey goes many layers deeper, and you can interpret this in that context or under that framework of good and evil. Of course, this word magic series, we are talking a lot about what it means to be a Magi, and the antithesis of the Magi, of course, is the Sorcerer. So for this presentation, I'm using Magi and Sorcerer, but you can use anything that helps you understand this a little bit better. Any concepts that you want to plug in place of Magi or Sorcerer, feel free to do so. So the Magi, or the seeker, follows his or her own path wherever it may lead them, regardless of what they may find there. The Magi recognizes what is, okay? And the Magi surrenders him or herself to this reality or to what is. They recognize this and they surrender themselves fully, okay? Or at least the Magi intends to do so, okay? The Magi symbolizes the creative force. This is something you see in storytelling. This is something you see in real life. I have a little bit of Buddhist teachings wound in here too, if you haven't noticed. So the sorcerer, on the other hand, is the controller. Okay, so if the Magi is one who surrenders and is open to the possibilities and greets the reality or greets the moment as it is, right, then the sorcerer is the opposite of that. The sorcerer is the controller, and his subjects are the controlled, right? The sorcerer begins their training quite often as a Magi. But through certain events, maybe there are certain tragedies that happen to the character in the story, for example, right? Like Darth Vader, of course, right? Under a certain set of events and traumatic experiences, etc., this this Magi who is in training rejects the universal way, rejects the way things are, and instead attempts to keep himself alive in a decrepit form, no matter the cost to his humanity. That describes the Darth Vader character, of course, right? He starts as a Magi, and through certain events, then joins the dark side, takes the wrong path. He tries to, his humanity is, ironically, in an attempt to preserve his own life, because we all know the story of Darth Vader. He exists in this decrepit form. Okay, he's kept alive by machines, and he's barely human, right? But in that, he loses his humanity, right? By trying to control and trying to be less than accepting of what is happening or what has happened, right? So he loses his humanity. The Sorcerer, or we could say Darth Vader in this case, if you want to use that example, Darth Vader's worldview is at odds with a surrendering to what is. He has forsaken this reality. He has forsaken what is, and when I say what is, it's whatever happens. He doesn't surrender to it, right? He tries to circumvent it, tries to control it, right? So he's forsaken this, and the Sorcerer symbolizes the destructive force, ultimately, because the Sorcerer, in their attempt to preserve themselves and control everything, actually cause more destruction than they do creation, right? So it is this middle ground or place of tension that occurs between the Magi and the Sorcerer, where our reality and existence is felt as if it were something real and actual. The Magi surrenders to this force, okay? However, the Sorcerer is compelled to control it. And that wanting to control, that desire to control comes from fear, okay? You don't want your loved ones to die. You don't want to die. You don't want things to change. You want things to stay as they are. That's a dangerous path, because the reality is that you will die. The reality is that your loved ones will die. The reality is things will always be in a constant state of change, right? This state of transformation or change, which I discussed in a previous part, is inevitable. And so the Magi recognizes this, embraces this, and greets life with a sense of gratitude that each and every day, each and every moment, every minute counts, and they are grateful for that, and they are open to every moment and to the people around them. No matter what the circumstances, you can marvel at the fact that, wow, I have this moment with this person, and I'm not going to waste it, right? That's what the Magi essentially recognizes, right? It's just a recognition of our reality. It's not anything more than that. It's an honoring of the fact that our existence is ephemeral. Our existence is temporary, okay? And if we honor this in the highest way possible, then you cannot help but be the Magi, okay? Now, the Sorcerer is not recognizing. They're not recognizing that every moment is important, and they want to preserve what they have and keep what they have in control, and they want to somehow find a way, some kind of loophole out of what is, and survive beyond what is normal, what is necessary, or control that which really is not in control, right? That's the difference between the Magi and the Sorcerer. But in between that, okay, between that, this creative force that's always unfolding, changing, things are born, things are dying, right? And then this force of this wanting to preserve or control things, right? Control's more of the extreme example of that. Wanting to control things, keep things as they are. We go through these thoughts often. I felt this in my life before, where we all have. I wish things were different. I wish things wouldn't change in this respect or that respect. Growing older, all of these things. There's a compulsion to want to kind of freeze something in time or stay a certain way, right? But that path is, in Star Wars, that path brings you to the dark side, okay? That path eventually takes you to the point where you want to control, and you'll do anything, including sacrificing your own humanity, in order to achieve this, right? That's what the whole story that's what the struggle between the Magi and the Sorcerer, the struggle between Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker is all about. So if you have this fear, if you greet life with fear and you're not open to the moment and going into it and having gratitude, just simply being, man, I'm grateful that I can be here today. I'm grateful that I'm alive and I'm around these people. And if you're not greeting your reality with this gratitude in every moment, in this openness, then you can easily live in this sense where you're wanting to, you don't want things to change, you're controlling, right? This is what the Sorcerer does. But this fear is what drove Darth Vader to the dark side. Ultimately was fear, because he was afraid of things changing. Instead of embracing it and going, well, I will meet this moment with great sorrow. Maybe something tragic has happened in your life. I'll meet this moment with great sorrow, but I will go into this moment and I will accept this moment. It doesn't mean that you're going to just put on a happy face and pretend that it's happy. No, you're going to go into a deep sorrow for the moment. You're going to honor the moment, no matter if it's a good moment, if it's something that is preferable to you or non-preferable. But that place in the middle, this creative force and this destructive force, right, is where the tension of life is actually built, and that's where our reality actually is comes together in a very real sense, right? Because all of life is a paradox. So, as with every paradox, both aspects of this tension, the Magi and the Sorcerer, or creation and destruction, both aspects are integral to the essence of this specific reality. Okay? Now, it should be understood that there are really just a few differing religious cosmologies, if you boil it down to the real meat of what these cosmologies are all about. There's only a few. And I'm talking specifically in the West. There's a few cosmologies regarding the origins of the Magi and the Sorcerer, or good and evil. In fact, there's only really two in the West that that kind of you can find in all of the Western religions. And it's important that we look at the religious traditions, because it's the basis for our thought. It's the basis for our language. It's the basis for our worldview. It's the basis for how you, as a person, whether you're atheist, religious or not, it's the basis for how you view good and evil, right? How you look at good and evil is very much through Western religion, whether you want to recognize that or not. So first, it must be understood, and also I should say, I should qualify this, I'm not a religious person particularly. I'm certainly not an atheist, but I'm open to the possibilities, but I certainly don't, I'm not here to tell you that you should join this or that religion, because I'm not a member of any specific religion myself, of course. So first, it must be understood that good and evil are concepts that only exist in the human mind. Okay? While these can be loosely compared to the forces of creation and destruction, and when I say the forces of creation and destruction, I'm saying the forces that cause our reality, our universe to come into creation, come into being, and then also to decay and dissolve back into the nothing, right? The Shiva, right? So this isn't a one-to-one relationship, okay? As all things in our world appear to have simultaneously both elements of creation and destruction in varying degrees. So this gets a little sophisticated, or not really sophisticated, but this gets a little, this gets a little deeper in the sense that everything that you can observe in the universe, in the world around you, has both elements of creation and destruction within them, right? Not in equal measure, but in varying degrees, right? The same is true for human beings when discussing the energy polarity of good and evil. So as we all know, or most should know at this point, that human beings possess the potential for great good as well as great evil. And there is an energy polarity, there's a balance between those two in all of us, right? Some people skew more towards evil, right? Some people skew towards goodness. A lot of us are right in the middle, right? There are even the most vile people, or the most heinous criminals, for example, right? You could broad brush, people like that and say, well, they're evil. They're just evil, right? But even in those people, there's some goodness to be found somewhere, right? There's some goodness somewhere. Not to say that they're absolved of their crimes, of course, right? But we have to understand that these energy fluctuations are real and actual, and they exist in us, right? And they come through us. So let's talk about the two major worldviews in our Western religions and our Western way of thinking. The two main differences between good and evil, or how these come about. In the Zoroastrian religion, there are two deities, essentially. At least in the main story. There's a father deity of these two, but you have Ahura Mazda and you have Ahriman. They were sort of ready-made opposites. Okay, they were born of another god, their father, but really the world starts with Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. They are engaged in a war of good versus evil. So these are just ready-made opposites. Good and evil, here they are, opposing each other, right? It is believed that ultimately goodness will prevail at the end of cosmological history, according to the Zoroastrian religion. The Fravashi, which is the symbol in the lower left corner being pointed to by the Zoroastrian priest, it's the winged figure, the man in the winged figure, right, in the lower left. This symbol represents the ultimate state of the cosmos and humanity at the time when goodness, or Ahura Mazda, have fully defeated his evil brother, Ahriman. So even in the Zoroastrian religion, even though you have these ready-made opposites, this is the Persian view of good and evil, even though you have these ready-made opposites, it is presumed that eventually goodness will prevail, and then there will be only goodness, right? In Judaism, however, it takes a little bit of a different, the understanding of good and evil takes a bit of a different turn. In Judaism, God has solely created everything with good intentions, okay? There are no ready-made opposites. There's no evil twin per se. Instead, all things come from one God. Choosing to not follow God's plan for the world is what causes evil in the Judeo worldview, in the Judeo-Christian worldview. There is no cosmological battle between good and evil in this theology. At least in Judaism. In Christianity, it's different. It is different. It's kind of a combination, right? Christianity is a combination of this Zoroastrian idea of these ready-made opposites and this goodness and then moving away from it. Of course, the Satan, the devil, started good, right? And then moved away from God. So that's very much a Hebrew teaching that's embedded in the Christian teaching, right? But then somewhere along the line, it starts to kind of seem like good and evil have always been around. And, then all of a sudden in Christianity, the Catholic Church points at things and goes, those are inherently evil. Those are all evil. But they forget the message of Judaism, which is saying, no, not really. These things aren't, there's no really inherent evil just because it opposes God. It's something that is just ungodly that's moved away from God, right? So there's kind of a mixing of that in Christianity, which is interesting. So something interesting begins to happen with Mithraism and Christianity alike. The god Mithra is seen as the mediator, or the embodiment of both good and evil. Okay. Psychologically, Mithra has his shadow side, acknowledging the lower self while attempting to transcend it, in so much as a human being is able to transcend, right? In the image in the lower right panel there is from a Mithraic temple. And this is, you can see he's slaying this bull here. It's a very famous depiction. And this is a statue, of course. And Mithra this is an astronomical, there's reason to believe that there's an astrological or astronomical basis for this. Right, Mithra is slaying this bull, which is marking the end of the age of Taurus. Okay. In this panel at the top, this is the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, and you can see that this person here, he is blowing the ram's horn. This is known as the shofar. And blowing the shofar is very interesting because Moses was associated with the ram, right? He's often called the ram. Well, the reason that the shofar plays a prominent role is because by blowing this ram's horn, you're ushering in the age of Aries. Okay. The age of Aries came after the age of Taurus. So in the Bible, there's that story where Moses comes down from the mountain and he sees his people worshiping this bull, right? The Baal is what it was called, or Baal, this golden calf. That was basically a recognition of the age of Taurus, which Moses so accurately pointed out that they were moving out of the age of Taurus and into the age of Aries. So that's why it was such a big deal, this golden calf. I don't think it was really worshipped so much as it was just understood that we are in the age of Taurus. So blowing the shofar is basically a signal that we are entering the age of Aries. This age of Taurus is no longer relevant, so you shouldn't associate with the golden calf. Now it's the age of Aries. So that's the significance of having the bulls in these images and the ram's horn. Okay. So the Christ figure you want to fast forward many centuries later with Christ, this Christ figure takes on the role as the mediator between God and man. And he sacrifices himself for the original sin of Adam and Eve. Okay. However, Jesus is presented as a purely good and divine figure, okay, whereas Mithra could be regarded as a truer likeness to man, even representing man himself. So the difference between Mithra's kind of like Mithraism had a good following up until about the 4th century in Rome. And then it was rooted out. So this Mithra character is more of a realistic form of Jesus in the sense that he's a man, but he is of earthly nature, but he is looking up to his higher self. This is a unification of good and evil. It's a very mature way of looking at good and evil, saying, yes, he's slaying this bull. He's beastly. He's acknowledging his lower beastly self, but he's also looking to the heavens, right? So he's this mediator type of character. Jesus is also a Mithra type of character, but the Christians changed it a little bit. And they changed it in the sense that Jesus was a man in physical form, but he really was a deity. He really was the Son of God. So not really a man. So the message of Christianity is almost to say, you'll never be able to quite achieve this. In fact, Jesus came down to excuse you from the Garden of Eden thing, eating from the tree of knowledge. And, that's somehow every human's fault. So that's basically saying you're inherently evil, but we need this deity who comes down, who is Jesus, the Son of God, who is inherently good. And do you see the difference there? You've got this human beings, inherently evil, inherently flawed, right? And then you have this deity who comes down to excuse mankind, right? So in that sense, the Mithra figure is actually a little more mature in that sense. It's a little more realistic to say, look, you are a man, you are a woman, you are a human being, you're fallible, but you have aspirations. You have higher aspirations, and you're like this figure who has good and evil within you, right? That's a more mature recognition than just having a deity figure like Jesus come down and to be all good, right, and all perfect. That isn't to say the teachings of Jesus are not valid. Obviously, the teachings of Jesus come from, they're what we should aspire to. They're what we should aspire to. It's just the way it was presented. Doesn't quite compare to the Mithraic tradition, which seems a lot more realistic in a way, right? And a lot more understanding and loving of both the higher and lower nature of man, or the good and the evil within man, right? So this sophisticated integration of the shadow self, right? So you could say evil's the shadow self, or the sorcerer is really just a shadow magi, right? This integration of the shadow self of mankind is a notion understood well before written history, and is not just a modern discovery of science, as Carl Jung so accurately pointed out, right? So there's a lot to unpack here.